Hello kindred longevity lifestyle designers, this is Gavin here with secretsoflongevity.com. The concept of Memento Mori is one that goes back to ancient Roman times. It is a similar concept that has been found in its application in many different cultures, but specifically the Western one originated, it's not entirely certain, but roughly from a Roman general who had one of his servants go behind him after a battle victory or a victory of some kind when he was parading through the streets to consistently tell him a phrase or a whole series of reminders, one of which was Memento Mori, to keep him from becoming too engrossed in the bravado of having just succeeded, because one day he might not succeed, and he didn't want his downfall or whatever fall he experiences to be as bad as it could be if he let himself become too inflated, I guess, with pride or the enjoyment of his current circumstances. So this phrase obviously got passed down and consistently used. Another similar one is Memento Mortis. So there's a slight difference between Memento Mori and Memento Mortis. Mori kind of means remember that you have to die, whereas Memento Mortis is remember death. So it's a little more general. I prefer that one just because it's not like so. It almost becomes like an affirmation if you're trying to think in terms of Memento Mori in its exact translation. But the concept or the idea of how it's expressed in art and how it's a reminder to keep in mind that there's the potential for mortality in your future at some point, that it can serve as a very useful tool and almost like a productivity technique to keep us on track on our life's path, on our goals, on our true will. And this can be very beneficial. You know, it's unlike the idea of carpe diem, another Latin phrase which is to embrace the day and kind of live in this moment. While it's important to live in the moment, you also have to have some forethought and planning and strategy as to how you're going to be living day to day. I mean, I could be hit by an asteroid tomorrow, and if I absolutely knew that was going to happen, I would live this day much differently than if I was going to live another 100 years. But because I don't know that, I have to assume I'm going to live a long time and that I have ways and goals along this whole path of living that way. So carpe diem is a little more hedonistic, and it actually does kind of mean, you know, eat, drink, and be merry kind of thing. And there's absolutely a time and place for that, but it's really not something that is sustainable, and it doesn't contribute to goals that are a little more loftier or a little more long-term to leave as a mark of your time on this planet. I mean, not everyone has to have some big, you know, altruistic intention with their life and their plans and hopes and dreams. But whatever it happens to be, even if it's just, I want to be fit my entire life up till the end, or if you are attracted to some of the transhumanist stuff, you want to live long enough to reach a point where there might be technologies that greatly enhance potential longevity to unconceivable lengths of time as we know it today. But whatever your goal happens to be, this practice of using imagery to become consciously aware of your mortality or potential mortality is a benefit. So Halloween has just passed. The Day of the Dead is that crossover from the 31st into November 1st. There was the Mexican celebrations where people dress up and paint their faces like skulls, and all around the world that day is known for being kind of like a transitional time, or a time when there's a thin veil between the world of the dead and our world. So perhaps this topic came to mind because I'm just susceptible to cultural imagery that has been ongoing, but I think it's an interesting thing to reflect on, especially at this time of year, but consistently throughout the year. So I'm not advocating any kind of practice that is, you know, about something that we can't completely prove. That's up to the individual person what you want to believe happens, you know, in the universe and after death. But again, it's this imagery and not being put off by it. So a lot of people find, you know, imagery of skulls or death, anything to do with death, Perhaps the Grim Reaper with an hourglass and a scythe is a little, disturbing for some people. But you have to look at the emotional reasons behind your reaction to an image like that. Personally, I was absolutely fascinated with all things related to death growing up, from as early as I can remember. It wasn't long ago, I had totally forgotten this, but some relative that was visiting happened to bring up the fact that when I was like 5, I kept a journal, and we were on some car trip, and this relative, I think it was like a first cousin twice removed or once removed, remembered that I would count roadkill and keep track of it in my journal, and I'd keep track of what type it was. It wasn't morbid, it wasn't like any kind of weird vibe that my parents and family got from that. That was just something I was interested in. That turned into an interest in the paranormal, and then eventually interest in, just exactly what death was. I remember in my first year of high school, I was already starting to get into darker music and starting to reach that angsty teen place that a lot of males go through, females too to some degree. But the imagery for me was already starting to take root, perhaps not to the absolutely most wholesome way. There were some negative sides to that which I was processing as part of my unfoldment, but this one thing stood out in my mind, which was the project in grade 9 English. It was a poetry anthology, and it was multiple projects in one, some writing, some analyzing poems, and various things, and you had to put it all together into one package, and it had to be on one central theme. And there's people doing things on like puppies, on love, on family, and on friends. There was these very broad general topics. I chose to do mine on death, and I remember creating a title page for it. It was just all black with red lettering and a red picture I had drawn. So yeah, I had that thing in mind, and when I was like 13, 14, I was reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Further on, I was getting into heavy metal music. I was a drummer. I played in metal bands after high school, and even tried out for a death metal band called Beyond Death. That didn't take off. So, I was on the edge of these things and never had an aversion to these concepts, and perhaps that's persisted to this day. And I think it is probably why I started this channel and got interested in this topic is, I really have no fear of death. Never really thought I had one. I have a fascination of it because it seemed to me to be the thing that people didn't understand the most in the world. So it was more of a place of wanting to be inquisitive, not so much from a scientific point of view, just I acknowledge that there is no way of knowing absolutely for sure what happens beyond that point of the body reaching its final heartbeats and final breaths. So throughout all of this unfoldment, I went through various phases. A big one has been metaphysical as well, and I definitely was at one point very much about positive affirmations and everything positive, love, light, and all things wholesome, fluffy, and glowing, I guess. And it wasn't till a significant time after having gone through that, and that was beneficial in clearing up whatever stagnant things I might have been holding on to from some of these paths of death metal and these other things, which have a fairly negative edge to them for sure. They're bringing up the darkness and getting people to look at it, but there is some attachment stuff going on there, which you move through. For me, however, it was kind of coming full circle. I came back around to acknowledging the darker side of everything, and it's just like night and day. It's a polarizing thing. It's not a duality of good versus evil. So darkness isn't something to be afraid of. There are aspects of the darkness that can teach us. You can also just simply think of it as like hot and cold, or expanding and contracting. This is a very Taoist perspective, and both exist for a reason in the universe, in day-to-day living. It's the yin and yang. So in acknowledging death and having the practice of having in your living space things that remind you of your mortality, it keeps you on track and focused and motivated. So for example, this ring of mine here, and that's my little portable Memento Mori that I carry around with me up close usually. is a skull and a spade. And the skull is obviously an image that is commonly shown and depicted in these Memento Mori type artworks. You can easily get a print of some sort of painting that reminds you of this and have it on your wall. I wouldn't go so far as to have it everywhere. That, I think, can have its negative drawbacks. It's the same as if you had one type of decoration or decorative theme throughout everything. You kind of get a little obsessed with that one thing, or eventually just like you tune it out and it wouldn't give you the benefit of having that one thing. So you might even have, the skeleton or skulls of an animal or even a human skull, fake or real. There's ways of purchasing those online completely legally. And if you really want to take it a step further, you can look at some of the Tibetan practices or practices from other cultures of meditations where you actually imagine yourself decaying and dying. I'm not going to go into the details of how these practices are done. I've kind of gone into them, but didn't feel it was all that necessary. But it's about releasing attachment to your physical life. And a lot of people, again, from that hyper-positive idea of spirituality or of perspective on life, might think that, oh, you're inviting illness and stuff into your body by doing that. And that's not the case. You're not saying, I want this to happen now. That's not your intention with visualizing this. It's acknowledging that this could and almost certainly will eventually happen to you. It's not trying to accelerate it. It's not trying to cause any harm to you. It's about detaching yourself from your physical body as all there is, and acknowledging that there are greater things, and that when you do that, you have the space and freedom to not allow yourself to get wrapped up in the day-to-day, the carpe diem, so to speak, which I think is a little more destructive than people realize. So, yeah, it's about the long-term perspective and cultivating that, especially from a longevity standpoint. If you're wanting to have practices in your life that are geared towards that, on the day-to-day basis, it can be a real struggle, especially as you're really trying to exceed and develop these new habits. It's easy to get caught in a rut of, letting a certain practice, whether it's dietary or exercise or meditative, go, and not building it in the way that it should be built. So having that reminder can be a way of snapping you back to the reality of like, oh yes, I'm doing this for a long-term purpose. I need to do this right now, even though I have this urge to not do it. I'm just going to settle in here and do this meditation, or I'm going to, not eat this ice cream or whatever it is when I'm out. I think you'll probably find if you make it an intention to become more familiar and comfortable with the concept of death, you can sink into a greater relaxation in life in general, and also around people who are at that place of either going through grief or in the process of dying. You might even be able to be a support for them. So, again, like, favorite, and share the video if you feel so inclined. Let me know what you think about this video in the comments below. And with that, I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limits.